Mail and news. In this nugget, we'll build on what we did in the introductory series relating to serving mail on your system and using sendmail in particular. We'll look at sendmail aliases, and we'll also talk about procmail, which is a program you can use in combination with sendmail to filter your mail, either for organizational purposes or to filter out unwanted mail. And then we'll talk about network news servers. I'll give you an overview of network news and talk about the configuration files used by the Internet News software package. All right, well, let's get to work. Let's start out this nugget by taking a look at an important file in the etc directory, and that's called the aliases file. Sendmail uses the aliases file to redirect mail from one particular user's account to some other user's account. In SUSE Linux, you have to run the new aliases command to get any changes that you've made to this file to be activated. Okay, so one of the things that is done typically with an aliases file, in the aliases file, is the root user's mail is redirected to some other user. This line will do that for you. Here, what this is saying is that any email that's sent to the root user should also be forwarded to the user Joe. So if Joe is your system administrator and Joe is his normal account that he logs in on, well, then it makes sense to have the root user's mail directed to the root user to also go to the Joe's account, because then when Joe is logged on as a normal user, he can check the mail that's sent to the root account. All right, he doesn't have to log on as root and check mail like, once an hour or something to see if there's anything wrong on the system. Now, the way that this line is configured is that the /root here at the end of the line will make sure that the email is also delivered to the root account, but a copy will be forwarded to Joe's account. To make this line active on your system, all that you would have to do is get rid of that hash mark at the beginning of that line, because that signifies that it's a comment and it will be ignored if there's a hash mark there. So you get rid of that, and then this will be active, that Joe will get the root user's email. All right. You can see it also sets up some other system aliases, like postmaster is set to root, mailer daemon is forwarded to postmaster, which in turn is forwarded to root, and so on. Okay. There's a bunch of these pseudo accounts that exist in Linux, like news account and the FTP account and the nobody account. All of those things are set to forward to the root account. Some of these accounts you can't even log into, okay? So, so the alias is just setting up that anything that goes to these pseudo accounts will actually go to the root user. And then if you had done that thing above, then these messages that went to the FTP account would also go to Joe's user account. Okay, a bunch of other well-known aliases that exist out there are forwarded to the standard thing on SUSE Linux. Okay, so back in the day, maybe somebody was used to sending email to FTP admin when they were trying to learn about the FTP service at a particular site. Well, that has been deprecated down to just FTP on this particular system, and then the FTP account is forwarded to root, and again, root's forwarded to Joe, and so on. All right, so all of these are set up by default, just so that if somebody's emailing some archaic name for some particular administrator of some service, then it gets forwarded to somebody who's actually going to read it instead of having it bounce back to them. Another thing that gets set up in the aliases file here is if you want to set up mailing lists on your site. So there's a service out there, a package out there called Majordomo. Now perhaps you've used Majordomo to subscribe or unsubscribe from some list, or use it for some mailing list as a user. Well, as an administrator, what you have to do to get Majordomo activated and have it interact with SendMail is you have to uncomment these lines here, and you have to just leave this line alone, okay? But you just have to uncomment the beginning of it, and this is just telling SendMail how to interact with Majordomo. Okay, and then you have to set up the owner of the Majordomo account, and this does not have to be the root user. This could be some other user on your system. You can also uncomment some things here if you want to test out Majordomo before you make it active. And the way that Majordomo works, like in general, is that a user out there on the internet can subscribe to some mailing list by just sending email to Majordomo at your domain and saying subscribe to this list. all right, then you don't have to intervene at all, right? Majordomo takes care of it. Majordomo takes their email address, puts it in some file, and then whenever a mail message comes for the whole list, Majordomo will forward it out to all the email addresses in a particular list file. Okay, so like I said, you have to uncomment these as the first step to getting Majordomo to work on your system. Another important file for Majordomo on your system is the actual Majordomo configuration file, again, living in the Etsy directory. So if you've installed the Majordomo package on your system, a configuration file comes with that, and this configuration file has to be edited for your particular site. Like you have to set up what your domain is, who the owner of your lists are, where the actual lists are kept. Okay, and these lists that are kept in on SUSE Linux, they're kept in var live Majordomo lists. The lists that are kept in there are actually just one email address after the other in the file, and it's one email address per line. All right, and that's all those are. So instead of editing those by hand, Majordomo will take requests to subscribe or unsubscribe and then alter these lists, but you have to tell it where those lists are living. Okay, you also can set certain logging information and things like that. And that's all in the top part of the file. In the bottom part of the file here, it's all this stuff that is commonly not changed. Okay, you just leave this stuff alone. A lot of the stuff down here is very complicated, sort of regular expression kind of things that we've talked a little bit about regular expressions when we were talking about Perl earlier in this series. But they're just a little bit too complex for normal users to change. If you think you need to change something or add something to this, you should consult some Majordomo forum. There's mailing lists, about Majordomo as well that you can subscribe to if you're managing a Majordomo list, and you should subscribe to those. Either there's one for administering Majordomo, there's also another one for using Majordomo, and you should walk through some of the changes if you think something needs to be changed down here. One of the things that gets done is, a bunch of headers are looked for, and if those headers are looked for or found, then, email is not forwarded out to the list if this is in the header. And what they're looking for in these particular regular expressions are for things like, so say I send an email to a list, okay, and it gets forwarded to everybody on the list. Well, say some of those people have, their accounts have been deactivated, or they're on vacation and they have an auto reply set up or something, right? Well, what's going to happen is their email is going to bounce back to the Majordomo sender. Okay, and then typically when things get mailed to the Majordomo sender, they get forwarded out to the whole list. Well, if something gets sent to the Majordomo sender that has like an auto reply in it, or undeliverable message or something like that in the subject line, then those emails will not be forwarded out to the list. This is just assumed to be either the account's been deactivated, or they're on vacation or whatever. And so if any of these sentences or any of these strings of characters show up in a subject line, then those things are not forwarded out by Majordomo. One last thing I wanted to do with regards to Majordomo is just point you to the greatcircle.com website, and on that website, if you go to majordomo/1.94.5/readme, then you'll see the Majordomo README file that's brought up here, and that just contains some information that you should know about Majordomo if you're managing a list. You can see it points out the FAQ files. It also tells you where you can subscribe if you want to be part of the Majordomo's administrators list, and so on. So if people realize that there's bugs, or you want to propose some change or something like that to Majordomo, then you can do that on the mailing list. Another way to have mail redirected from one account to another account is via the use of a .forward file. So this allows normal users to change where their mail goes. So if I edit a .forward account, if I create a .forward account in my home directory, then any mail that is directed to Perry at this particular domain will then be forwarded to the email address that I put in the .forward file. All right. So the .forward file has to either be owned by root or it has to be owned by me, the user Perry. If it's forwarding Perry's mail, it's got to be owned by Perry or root, and it cannot be group writable. If it's group writable, SendMail won't obey the .forward file because it doesn't know that it's not a forgery, right? Because if it's a group writable, somebody could come in that's in my group and put an email address in the .forward file, and then they could be stealing all my mail and reading important mail messages. All right, so the .forward file can't be group writable. That's an important feature. Now, the .forward file, in addition to just being able to forward mail, is also where you can set up a command that allows you to filter mail on your system. And the program that will allow you to filter mail, or one of the programs, is called procmail. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to write a line in this .forward file that will set up procmail, and this is right out of the procmail man page. So if you want to set up procmail to filter mail on your system, you should type this line exactly character for character into your .forward file. Well, character for character, except for the fact that if your procmail isn't located in user bin, then you need to specify exactly where procmail is located on your system. Maybe it's in user local bin. And also here at the end where I've used Perry, you should use your local email address, you know, the username on your system. Okay, so let's talk about what this line of code does. Basically, what this does is the very first character is a vertical bar, which is the pipe symbol. So it's going to pipe mail into the following command. What this is going to set up, the IFS stands for an inner field separator, and it's setting that up to be a space. And if that goes okay, then what's going to happen is it's going to run user bin procmail. It's going to execute the user bin procmail command. And the -F here is a flag that gets sent, or a flag that gets sent to procmail that will update the timestamp on the from field. Okay. The double vertical bar here is like an OR statement. So if this didn't execute, if we didn't execute procmail, then what we should do is we should exit with a code of 75, and that has meaning to the SendMail program. Okay. So this looks a little bit cryptic, but this will get procmail to run on your system. Now, the way that procmail works is this. It receives a message from SendMail. So SendMail is trying to send Perry a message. And, you know, there could be a bunch of different SendMail processes running on your system. All right. So what it's going to do is it's going to, procmail is going to execute on this message, and it's going to open what's called a recipe file, procmail.rc. or .procmail.rc. It's all one word, .procmail.rc. That particular recipe file will then be used to look at the message to see if it should be delivered or whether it should be disposed of, and so on. Okay, so what we're going to do now is look at how we can construct a .procmail.rc file and the kinds of things that we can do in a .procmail.rc. All right, so what I've done here is I've created a .procmail.rc file in my home directory, and I just created that with a text editor. And then I've typed this into my .procmail.rc file, and this is just a sample of what you can do with procmail. Now, let's go through this because it's a little bit cryptic to the new user. So the :0 marks the beginning of a recipe. Okay, this is the recipe that procmail is going to look at. And like I just said, it can either decide to deliver a message or dispose of a message, and so on. After the :0, you can put any number of flags. There's all sorts of flags available for procmail. The C stands for copy. Then the next colon delimits that I'm going to specify the name of a lock file. Okay, or actually the next colon specifies that I want to use a lock file. After that colon, I can specify a name of the lock file if I want to use a particular name. By not specifying a name, I'm letting procmail choose what to name the lock file. All right, now you're saying to yourself, what's a lock file? What are you talking about? Well, see, the problem is that mail to your system can arrive in bursts. You might get like 4 mail messages all at once. All right, and each of those mail messages is going to go through that .forward file. That .forward file is specifying to use procmail, and procmail is going to look at your procmail.rc file, and then if another mail message comes before procmail.rc finishes with this message, then you're going to have two send mail processes working on your system. And the problem there is that if there's any writing to be done, those two processes might overlap their writing and cause some formatting errors where mail is not readable anymore. Okay, so having a lock file guarantees that all of these operations will be done one after the other, and they won't be done at the same time and cause a jumbling of your mail messages. Okay, the very next line here specifies a file name to write the copy of the mail message. So all this procmail.rc does is it takes every mail message that comes into the Perry account and it makes a copy of that mail message in a file called mail.backup in my home directory. And like I was saying a few minutes ago, the way that procmail works is that it goes through this set of rules in the recipe file, in the procmail.rc file, and it looks at the various rules, and if it gets to the end of the set of rules and nothing has caused the message to get deleted, then it will append the message to the end of your spool directory, okay, your actual mail directory up in var, up in the var directory. Okay, so what happens here is a copy of my message gets put into mail backup, but the actual message still gets put into my spool directory, and I can read that with any of the mail utilities that I want. Okay, so this is purely just a copy of the mail message that's written to mail.backup. Now let's look at a slightly more complex procmail.rc file. Now here's a different procmail.rc file. In this procmail.rc file, I started with a :0 to denote the beginning of a recipe, but I'm not specifying any flags there. Okay, I'm not specifying any lock files in this one. In this one, instead, on the second line, I started with an asterisk, and in this line, I'm looking for a particular regular expression. So the caret from says that the line has to start with from. So I'm looking at the from field of the email header. And then the dot star says there can be any kind of characters in there in between from and a particular address that I don't want to receive mail from. So I just wrote someone I don't like at somewhere.com. Okay, so this particular email address has to appear somewhere in the from line. That's what this says in English. If it does, then what happens is the output, that mail message that matches this, is output to /dev/null, which we know is like the Linux black hole. So that's basically just deleting that email, and it's not going to put that email message into my inbox. It's just going to get rid of it off the system. If you want to see other procmail example files, poke around on the internet. We kind of have the idea of how the structure of procmail works. You need to set up that .forward file and then your procmail.rc file to handle and filter the mail messages. So there's example files out there to help you filter mail messages based on the domain that the mail came from, and just to allow you to organize your mail. Some people have used procmail to try to filter out spam on their system. Now, procmail is capable of filtering out spam, but the problem with procmail is you really have to be good at the regular expressions, and I don't want to go into a deep lecture on regular expressions, so I'm just going to leave procmail for at the level that we have it now, which is we understand the basic use of it, and if you want to incorporate more complex procmail.rc files for your mail system, then you can do that. What I want to do now is look at some more advanced filters that are out there that will work with procmail and sendmail to enable you to filter out spam on your system. Instead of messing with procmail to filter out spam on your system, a more efficient way is to use an open source spam filter called Spam Assassin. Now, Spam Assassin is available from the Apache folks, the same people that wrote the web server, and you can get everything you need for Spam Assassin at this site. You can look at the various documentations, you can download the code, they'll show you how to do tests to make sure that you're not filtering out good mail, and it's just a much more easy to use and versatile spam filtering system than Procmail is. It can work alongside of Procmail, so if you have Procmail in place to do filtering and organizing of your messages on a user level, Spam Assassin will not affect any of that. It will just filter out at the system level before it ever gets to users, and you can also configure it on a user by user level. If you're getting if spam's getting through the system-wide filter, individual users can configure it to block out even more messages from getting to them. All right, well, now let's move on and talk a little bit about network news. Newsgroups really revolutionized the way that people exchanged information over the computer. The first thing I got off of a newsgroup was the full text of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Okay, I was just so excited that somebody had typed all this in with all the stage directions and everything. It still cracks me up to this day to think about it. But newsgroups can be on something as general as, science fiction movies. So you could have people discussing various science fiction movies, to something as specific as some research project, some theoretical computer science research project would have a newsgroup. Now, the readership of one newsgroup could be, hundreds of thousands, and another newsgroup could be like 15 people. That's kind of the beauty of network news, is that you can talk about things with people that have a similar interest, even though they're distributed all over the world, and even if your interest is, very, very specific. Well, there's different types of news servers that exist out there on the internet. The top of the chain is a full newsfeed news server. A full newsfeed news server is like a large commercial server, and it's going to receive all the posts for all of the Usenet news groups out there. Now, a news client, someone that has a news client running on their computer, can access the full newsfeed news server directly and read news right off of that. However, a full newsfeed news server will also supply other news servers like farther down the chain and give them information, and then clients can hook up to them and read their news as well. So not all of the load is put onto the full newsfeed news server. A leaf node server is something that is only getting information from upstream news servers. So, there's things in between a full newsfeed news server and a leaf node server that would be like the middle of the road kind of things. The middle of the road servers might be pulling only select groups off of the full newsfeed server. A leaf node server might be pulling stuff right from a full newsfeed server. It might be pulling something from an intermediary news server. But the important thing about a leaf node server is that it doesn't supply news to anyone else. No other servers are getting information from a leaf node server. Now, newsreader clients could connect to a leaf node server. However, if this leaf node server only downloaded some subset of all the Usenet news groups, then the client that connects to that server will only be able to read and post to some subset of those servers, okay, of those news groups. All right, and anything that gets posted to this leaf node server will then get pushed back up the chain so that the full newsfeed news server gets it eventually. All right, and then another kind of news server is a local news server. Now, a local news server is not part of the Usenet news group. All right, but you might want to have a local news server for your particular company so that employees in your company and maybe users of your products or things like that can communicate and talk about things related to your particular product, but they're not accessible to the Usenet community at large. All right, so you're using all that software that everyone else is using for news groups, but you're restricting the access to your news to a group of people that you want to be able to read this stuff. Maybe it's sensitive company information that you don't want to broadcast to everyone. Now, if you want to configure a local news server on your computer, what you need is the INN package, the Internet News Package. There's a bunch of configuration files in the /etc news directory. The main ones are inn.conf, sometimes called innd.conf, incoming.conf, readers.conf, storage.conf. They're all located in the etc news directory. Now, when you install the INN package, some of these files are set up by default to be configured to be a local news server. You still have to go in and modify various things like what your domain name is and things like that. Here's a sample of a very simple inn.conf file. The very first thing is the mail transfer agent. So you have to specify a send mail program, and you have to put you have to use these flags, and you have to put a %s at the end. And what this does is it makes it so that when you post to a particular news group, when you post to some local news group, then your username is appended and is used as the sender of the mail. Okay, so that just makes it so that someone can tell who wrote the news group message. There's usually an organization tag in there that you explain what your organization is. There is the overview method, and by default that's set to traditional indexed method. Now this is fine if your news groups are low traffic, but if you're talking about really high traffic news groups, you probably want to use one of the other overview methods like buff indexed, for instance. You have to give the domain name of your site, and you also have to give a mail command. And the typical mail command that's given for internet news is user bin inn mail. Then you have to specify a status and a timer. Now the status and the timer relate to how often the status report is created. So that's the status. So this says once per hour, every 3,600 seconds, a status report is created. If you put a 0 there, then there will be no status reports. And a timer tells you how often that performance statistics should be written to the log files. Again, a 0 would disable this, and 3,600 says once per hour, performance statistics are written to a log file. So that's kind of like the most basic stuff that you need in inn.conf. If you look at your inn.conf file after you install the inn package, you'll see it'll be like hundreds of lines long, and there's all sorts of things in there, but this is sort of the main things that you need to set up to run a local news server on your system. Incoming.conf is another important configuration file for news, and that defines where news feeds come from. And there's a whole bunch of parameters that you set in incoming.conf, and there's 3 classes of these parameters. There's the global class, the group class, and the peer class. So first you set the global parameters, and they apply to everyone, but then within a particular group you can override the global parameters for one particular group. And then peers are members of a group, and you can override group definitions by an individual peer definition. Okay, so it's kind of a hierarchy. Global is sort of for everyone, group is for a bunch of peers, and then peers are for like individuals. Okay, possible parameters that you could set in incoming.conf are things like host name and max connections, and whether you require passwords and things like that. Okay, and then there's the storage.conf file. Now, the main thing that gets set in storage.conf is what kind of method do you use for storing articles. And there's 2 main methods. There's the timed hash spool, and there's the cyclic buffer spool. Now, the timed hash spool, what that does is it stores articles on the news server, and every bunch of articles that it pulls off the news server, it creates a new directory for. So basically, it's creating a directory based on the time that the article arrived. Okay, and so there's lots of directories and a few articles in each directory, in each of the directories. Okay, so timed hash, what it does is there's all this overhead for reading articles because the articles are all split up between all these different directories. Okay, the other alternative is the cyclic buffer spool, and this one will be faster because it speeds up the process, because every article that's received is placed into a pre-configured file of a particular size. So that speeds up the processing because you don't have to create directories and things as articles are received. Now, the negative of the cyclic buffer spool is that because the buffer files are created at a set size, when the articles fill up a buffer file, then the file is overwritten starting from the beginning. So imagine it's a cyclic buffer. So we fill up the buffer, we have this big buffer, and we fill it up as we go along, okay? And then when we get to the end and we're done filling it up, then we go back and we start writing over stuff. So if somebody hadn't read these articles that were in here, well, they're out of luck. And so what you have to do, what you have to fine-tune as a system administrator, is how big should this buffer be. And so this makes sense as long as you can have a buffer that's big enough so that you're not deleting articles that people haven't read yet. All right, and the last configuration file I want to talk about is readers.conf. And this defines permissions for the readers that are connecting to your news server. So you can specify the authentication type. Do you want to supply a username and a password? Do you want to authenticate by what host they're coming from? Things like that. And then you also specify access in here. So do you want to allow only read-only access to the news group? So your people can read the news, but they can't post anything. Will you allow them to post articles and things like that? So that's all controlled through readers.conf. Okay, well, it's time to wrap up our nugget on mail and news. We started by looking at the etc aliases file, which is a configuration file for the SendMail program, and we looked at some of the things that you could do in there, creating aliases so that mail is directed from a particular account to some other account. And then we talked about the ProcMail program. ProcMail is a program that allows you to filter mail that you get through the SendMail program. And ProcMail, you can set it up so that it works in your individual user directory. First, you have to put a particular line in a .forward file, and then you can create ProcMail recipes, they're called, in your .procmailrc file. And I showed you a couple simple examples of ProcMail recipes. If you're interested in filtering your mail more and organizing your mail more with ProcMail, look at some various how-tos on the internet and, for example, ProcmailRC files, and you'll see all sorts of different things that you can do in there. And then we talked about news servers at the end there. And I just gave you a little overview of the kinds of configuration files that are set up with the Internet News program and what goes in those configuration files. On SUSE Linux, when you install that, you get all those configuration files, and they're set up by default, but you have to go in and change certain things like domain names and other things that I was telling you about. There's also README files to get, to take you through step by step on how to set up a local news server or a leaf node news server if that's what you're interested in doing. Well, I hope you found this nugget informative, and thanks for watching.